Hello, and welcome to another episode of Solipsist Watched. I'm your host, the Social Solipsist, and this week I watched Vice from 2018. So, fellow millennials, how would you like to relive the political traumas of your youth? Yeah, me too. Uh, Vice is a movie I've briefly talked about before, or referenced when we were talking about. This is directed by Adam McKay, and Adam McKay also directed that other film for Netflix, the name of which I'm literally forgetting right now. Don't Look Up. That was the one that sucked. However, I've talked about the fact that Adam McKay is also known for The Big Short, which I'm a fan of. And so I was curious about this film for a variety of reasons, including the fact that Christian Bale also got an Academy Award for it, even though I've voiced my opinions on the Academy as well. Anyway, this is an interesting one. Coming off of The Big Short and then seeing where he would go subsequently with Don't Look Up, this movie, now I'm worried I'm going to say the wrong thing. This movie feels like a warning. It is still, in a lot of ways, very good. But it feels to me like a warning that The Big Short was a fluke. That the writing and pacing and overall like high quality is a fluke, and that Adam McKay is more suited towards making more of the type of films that he made before, like Anchorman and Talladega Nights and the other guys. This is an interesting one because it's specifically because it's about a real person, and it purports to be historically accurate. And it is troubling to watch for a lot of reasons. I think following anyone's political career, especially in the U.S., if you have a historical political viewpoint, a historical political knowledge, to say, oh, who are these people? Who did this person grow up with? Who did they idolize? Whose values did they follow in the footsteps of? So on and so forth. That's always, interesting in its own right from a historical perspective. But this is not a historical movie. This feels like a warning about a style of film that Adam McKay wanted to make but isn't very good at. Where, obviously, I think this goes without saying, but the rest of this video is going to get overtly political, even though I try and keep it relatively neutral. I am liberally minded, but there are certain things I don't tolerate or don't particularly like, and in particular is from any political side, any kind of overt character. I don't want to say character assassination, because don't get me wrong. Dick Cheney is a garbage human being who should be tried for war crimes. But this has a lot of signs similar to Don't Look Up, of Adam McKay having positive intentions and making an effort to talk about what are typically considered to be um, liberal political views, political and social views. Uh, and unfortunately, making making liberal political views look bad because of the quality of his presentation. Whereas Don't Look Up sort of very badly addresses the issues of climate change and the lack of addressing of climate change in both public and private sectors. This one feels more like he wanted. It feels similar in that he wanted to make a sort of oorah film about the liberal perspective on the 90s and 2000s and the political era that happened then, and the like sort of the American trauma that occurred as a result. But he does it kind of poorly. Well, that's not really a good intention in the first place, because it feels like he wanted to make a documentary, or wanted to make a documentary style thing, and then decided that it would have more sort of self-congratulatory impact if instead it was it had some let's say historical fiction elements to it, or some heavily simplified events, or some concocted events. And while I don't think this film goes dramatically off the rails from the reality of who Dick Cheney was, I'm always wary of any historical figure, any sort of biopic kind of thing. And especially when it is an overtly, well, I don't know if it's better or worse, if it's a positive or negative biopic. There's plenty of biopics of historical figures that are the figures that are viewed in a positive light, but tend to gloss dramatically over their failings or their problems. This sort of goes the opposite way. And to be fair, I don't agree with, as far as I'm aware, I don't agree with anything that Dick Cheney's ever stood for. But it does feel like they're like, let's just crank it up to 11 to make this guy seem really extra evil and conniving. And I don't know what to do with that. It's not, I can't even say that the movie is in some ways entertaining because it's really there's a lot of things that are really well done about it, but it's also sort of inherently draining and traumatic because of having lived through that political era, and my like political awakening happening during basically during the Bush years. My earliest memories of politics and policy came from basically post 9/11 America. And I think that's true of a lot of people in and around my age. So this is troubling to watch and sort of hard to watch in a very direct and personal way, notwithstanding the character himself, or the various characters themselves. And given a lot of good production and some pretty good but sometimes ethically questionable writing, not ethically questionable, but like, I don't know, it's sort of pretending to be journalistic, and that's sort of what bothers me, is that it blurs the line. It's definitely not supposed to be a documentary or journalism, but it feels like it's trying to, or it feels like it's trying to trick you. It's inherently kind of propagandistic, and even if I agree with that, I have to be we all have to be politically wary of what people on any given side may be telling us to believe. And so, I mean, fuck Dick Cheney, but it still feels kind of dirty. I don't know if any of that's making sense, but that said, overall, this thing has a lot more movies, or this movie has a lot more things going for it than Don't Look Up. It is much better written, just generally. Pacing and story-wise, obviously, with it being based on real-world events and a real character or a real person, that's easier to not fuck up. But there's something to be said for pacing and the selection of personal events that are portrayed and how they're portrayed that make it into an overall satisfying narrative. Unfortunately, all of that is capped off by the end of the film, which just, like, the last 10 minutes of the film, including the like mid-credits sequence, feel like really hammer home the points I've been putting forward here before, which is just that it feels like liberal propaganda. I feel dirty saying liberal propaganda because I am liberal, but like it feels nasty. It feels like, hey, let's get our shots in right at the end to just make everything out to be as conniving as possible, in a like poetic, charismatic way that is not even particularly in line with the rest of how the narrative is delivered. And it feels more like we gotta send the viewers home on a high note kind of thing. And it just feels nasty. And then the mid-credit sequence, which is more of a nod to the contemporary state of politics. There are a few other smaller nods to it in the film, but in particular that sequence and reference to the post 2016 state of political discourse. Yeah. It's painful. So while most of the narrative holds together pretty well, those things towards the end are really sort of get rid of a lot of the goodwill I otherwise have towards it. That said, cinematography is pretty good. A lot of it is highly desaturated or color graded towards kind of gray and brown. And I think that's really in an effort to portray this sort of dour / evil kind of conniving thing. I don't really think it serves the movie that well, and does detract from the overall visual appeal of the film. I don't think you have to tell a sad, angry, frustrated, whatever story with a bunch of film effects to make it uglier. Like, I already get it. But otherwise, cinematography is often pretty good. There's a few shots that are actually pretty great, but they're not, incredible. It's pretty consistent with, I think, the rest of McKay's work. He's not a great cinematographer, but he's okay. Or, well, I guess he didn't do the cinematography, but you know what I mean. And the cast is where I have to bring it back, because the cast is so good. Like, where Don't Look Up had some big names with some decent to questionable performances, the performances here are great all around. Obviously, some of these characters are very ingrained in many of the minds of people in the U.S. Cheney, Christian Bale as Cheney is incredible, and apparently he gained a bunch of weight for this, which, dude, please stop doing that to yourself. He also lost a ton of weight for The Machinist years ago, and he just has to stop abusing his body. That's not, let the makeup artists do their work. That said, the makeup artists still do obvious work, and they do very good work. But his portrayal is also pretty incredible. Steve Carell as Donald Rumsfeld is great. Sam Rockwell as George Bush is great. Even Tyler Perry as Colin Powell is great. And then Amy Adams as Lynn Cheney, who I have no idea of how she actually is, but her portrayal is great. Her acting is very, very good, and gives a great sort of counterpart / foil to Dick Cheney, as sort of this person who's both reeling him in and driving him. Really fascinating dynamic between the two. And I don't know how much of that is the writing and how much of that is just really good acting, really good chemistry between the two of them, in somewhat limited scenes, but still done really, really well. But all of the characters are portrayed, especially the historically significant characters, are portrayed in ways that are not, and I would worry about this with the other problems with the film, they are not overtly they're not doing the SNL kind of satirical portrayal. None of them are putting on the voice. They're all doing, they're all making a concerted effort to do an honest portrayal of the person without overdoing it. No, Sam Rockwell is not doing the George Bush voice. He's doing a voice that works. He's doing a voice that works really well. Christian Bale, likewise. Steve Carell, likewise. They all do a really solid version of the person without it being a joke or being overtly sort of satirical. So the cast, combined with a pretty solidly paced script, really salvages a lot of what would otherwise be a kind of inherently distressing and questionably produced film. So I'm sort of two minds about this one. I think it's worth seeing if you can stomach the content. I think it's worth seeing for the performances alone. But there is that question of having lived through it yourself and how much you can stomach rehashing the historical events, the political nature of the time, and then how much you can sort of stomach the propagandistic elements of it. That said, for all my criticism, I don't know how you would make this film. I don't know how you would make this film without doing that, because I don't know what the point of the film is. Which actually comes around to a much bigger point that I don't have an answer for and have sort of avoided talking about because I don't know what to say. I don't know who this film is for. It's not... Well, I do know who it's for. I just don't know why it's for that group. It feels it feels very self-congratulatory. It doesn't seem to tell anything new, right? Depending on how politically aware you were in the Bush era, some of it may be more news to you, but it's not like it's not an expose. It's not like everybody was making jokes about Dick Cheney at the time. Like, it's not telling anything new. It's not illuminating any new parts of his life, really, except for some minor stuff. It's not doing anything other than being sort of self-congratulatory about, hey, remember Dick Cheney? He sure was a piece of shit and still is. Let's continue to be mad about it. And it's sort of like, it's sort of masochistic inherently in its structure. Anyway, I could ramble on about this. It's just a weird film has a lot of good things going, but is inherently sort of troubling. If any of that made you interested, go for it. Otherwise, don't. What the hell does that mean? Anyway, I've been the Social Solipsist. I'll see you guys next time.